You deserve everything you're going to get. Those are the words from a mother to her daughter's killer today in court.
20 feet. That was the distance between a mother and the answer she had been searching for. For 8 months, she knocked on her boyfriend's door, asking the same question. Had he seen her daughter? Each time, he had an answer. A missing person report had already been filed. Search efforts spread across the city. Flyers went up on telephone poles. Investigators followed leads that went nowhere. Family members kept asking questions, returning to places they had already searched. All the while, the person who knew what had happened stood just 20 feet from where she was looking. This is the case of Audreona Barnes. Everything in this documentary is based on official police statements, court records, and sworn courtroom testimony. Nothing has been added through speculation or rumor. Audreona Barnes was 18 years old in the summer of 2021. By then, she had already accomplished something many students never do. She had graduated from high school a full year early, at just 17. While many of her classmates were still deciding what direction to take, Audreona had settled on hers years earlier. Since the 9th grade, she had planned to serve in the military. By that summer, she was actively meeting with recruiters and seriously considering both the National Guard and the U.S. Army. These weren't casual conversations. She scheduled appointments, and she showed up for them. Her time was divided between 2 homes. She spent part of each week with her mother, Akua Avignon, in Warrensville Heights. The rest of her time was spent across town in an apartment on Warner Road in Cleveland's Broadway Slavic Village neighborhood. The apartment belonged to her boyfriend, Benny Washington. Washington was 39 years old. Audreona was 18. The age difference would later become an important part of understanding the relationship. They had only begun dating that spring. In just a few months, the relationship moved quickly, and Audreona became pregnant with Washington's child. Not long afterward, the relationship changed course. Audreona told Washington she wanted to end it. She no longer wanted to be with him. She was preparing for a military career, expecting a baby, and making plans for the future. Those plans no longer included Washington. There was no immediate sign of how he reacted, at least not on the surface. July 30th, 2021, a Friday. Audreona had an appointment that day with her military recruiter. It was another step toward the future she had been planning for years. After the meeting, the recruiter drove her back to Benny Washington's apartment on Warner Road. It was the last confirmed sighting of Audreona Barnes, alive. Earlier that day, she had been on FaceTime with her mother. The two had plans to meet that evening. There was nothing unusual about the conversation, and nothing to suggest it would be their last. Later that evening, a text message was sent from Audreona's phone to Benny Washington's phone, asking for a ride from a gas station. After that message, everything stopped. Audreona's phone was turned off. Her social media accounts went silent. There would be no further activity from either. The evening she was supposed to meet her mother came and went, but Audreona never arrived. Akua Avignon called. She sent text messages. There was no answer. Nothing that suggested her daughter was on the other end. By the following day, concern had turned into urgency. Akua went to Washington's apartment looking for answers. He told her he believed Audreona had already gone home, just as they had planned. His explanation was straightforward, and he gave no indication that anything was wrong.
Akua wasn't convinced. It wasn't because she suspected Washington at that point. She simply knew something didn't feel right. She searched everywhere she could think of. When those efforts led nowhere, she went to the Warrensville Heights Police Department and reported her daughter missing. The search for Audreona Barnes had officially begun. So had the deception that would complicate it.
Police initially treated Audreona's disappearance as a possible runaway case rather than a suspicious one. That distinction shaped the early investigation. It meant a different starting assumption about what had happened to an 18-year-old woman who had appointments to keep and plans for her future. Aquina didn't accept that conclusion. She spoke publicly and repeatedly, saying there hadn't been enough progress in her daughter's case. She questioned whether everyone who should have been interviewed had been, and said the investigation appeared to have stalled. She also turned to local news, sharing details about Audreona's disappearance. She pointed out that her daughter had left behind personal belongings, had no money, and had nowhere obvious to go. To her, the circumstances didn't fit someone choosing to walk away from her life. Throughout the search, Benny Washington remained closely involved. He called Aquina almost every day to ask how she was doing. He told her they would find Audreona. He stood in Aquina's kitchen, speaking about how much he missed Audreona and the baby they were expecting. On more than one occasion, he drove her around the city, helping search for the woman investigators were still trying to locate. Detectives interviewed Washington early in the investigation. Warrensville Heights detective Gregory Curry was among those who spoke with him.
House in Cleveland, they then dropped her back off there. They just don't know if she went back into the apartment or if she walked away.
According to testimony, Washington was cooperative at first, but once he realized he was being questioned as part of a police investigation, his demeanor changed. He became confrontational, requested an attorney, and declined to answer further questions.
Months passed with little visible progress. Investigators had no confirmed leads, no body, and no clear answers. Audreona's family continued organizing vigils and keeping her name in the public eye. Washington was there as well. He attended the searches, stood beside the family, and remained part of the effort to find Audreona, even as the investigation failed to uncover where she had gone.
March 11th, 2022. 7 months after Audreona Barnes disappeared, Benny Washington was evicted from his apartment on Warner Road. Bailiffs removed his furniture and belongings. Items left behind were discarded, ending up in piles on the apartment's second-floor balcony. About a week later, on March 17th, cleanup crews returned to clear what remained. As one worker sorted through the items on the balcony, she made a discovery beneath piles of clothing, blankets, and cardboard stacked against the railing. She found human remains. The property manager immediately contacted Cleveland police. The Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office later confirmed the identity through its examination.
The remains were those of Audreona Barnes. Within hours, local news outlets were reporting that Audreona's remains had been found on the balcony of the same apartment building where she had last been seen 7 months earlier. Warrensville Heights detective Gregory Curry, who had been involved in the investigation from the beginning, told reporters he had never ruled out foul play. Investigators, he explained, had simply never been able to determine whether Audreona had re-entered the apartment after being dropped off or had left the property. When reporters reached Akua Avegnion, she was too overwhelmed to speak at length.
When I asked for help, she would never just walk away from me or her siblings. Never!
She managed only a brief statement, saying it was hard not having her child.
2 days later, on March 19th, 2022, Benny Washington was arrested. Authorities said the arrest came 1 day after he allegedly fled from police, entered a stranger's home, and jumped from a window in an attempt to escape. The charges against Benny Washington were extensive. A Cuyahoga County grand jury indicted him in April 2022 on charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, gross abuse of a corpse, and weapons offenses. A second person was also charged in connection with the case. Marquetta Wallace, 34, was indicted separately on 1 count of gross abuse of a corpse. As the case moved toward trial, Washington's criminal history also became part of the public record. In 2010, he was convicted of shooting a woman in the back over a small cash debt. He served 7 years in prison before being released. That prior conviction established that Washington had previously been convicted of a violent offense involving the shooting of a woman. It also meant the court was now considering new allegations involving the death of Audreona Barnes after his release from prison. Court records also show that Washington faced 2 additional criminal cases in 2019. One involved allegations of abuse involving a young child. The other included charges of arson, assault, and menacing. The outcomes of those specific cases were not part of the public record reviewed for this documentary, so no conclusions are drawn from those filings, beyond the fact that they were made.
The trial began in May 2023 before Judge William McGinty in Cuyahoga County and lasted 7 days. Jurors heard testimony from investigators, the medical examiner, and other witnesses. They reviewed crime scene evidence and a timeline that traced the months Benny Washington spent assuring Audreona's mother that her daughter would eventually come home. On May 24, 2023, the jury returned its verdict. Washington was found guilty of 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, and gross abuse of a corpse, all with firearm specifications.
Guilty to the notice of prior conviction and to the repeat violent offender specification. The notice of prior conviction details a felony of the 2nd degree, which is felonious assault, and it's going to be found at case number 539398. The court finds that the prison term imposed pursuant to the sentencing statutes would be inadequate on cash or automobiles, and he has no liquid assets. And
Judge McGinty also found him guilty of having weapons while under disability. The jury acquitted Washington of the aggravated murder and kidnapping charges. That distinction is important. He was not convicted on every count in the indictment. Even so, the murder convictions carried the most significant consequences and ensured he would not leave the courtroom a free man. The trial also brought together the evidence investigators had assembled over the previous 7 months. Jurors heard about the cell phone records, the discovery of Audreona's remains on the apartment balcony, and testimony describing how Washington continued living in that apartment and staying in regular contact with Akua Avignon while the search remained active.
By the time deliberations began, the central question for the jury was no longer whether Audreona Barnes had been the victim of a crime. Their task was to decide which charges the evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt. On May 24, they delivered that answer.
At sentencing in June 2023, Audreona's mother, Akua Avignon, addressed Benny Washington directly.
To start in the 10th grade when they offered her that chance because she was on the track to graduate early, then she would have never came across your path. I hope every time you close your eyes, you see her. Every time it's quiet, you hear crying. You deserve everything that you're going to get. You are disgusting. You helped me look for her.
She told him she would spend the rest of her life facing every birthday without her daughter. She said it had taken her 10 hours and 21 minutes to bring Audreona into the world, and that he had taken her away in a matter of seconds because she no longer wanted to be with him. Akua also reminded the courtroom that Audreona had graduated a year early and had planned to serve in the military, a goal she had held since the 9th grade. She told Washington she hoped he would see her daughter's face every time he closed his eyes and hear her voice every time the room fell silent. Audreona's aunt, LaToya Clark, also spoke. She told Washington he had killed someone who was barely more than a child, and that nothing an 18-year-old could have done would ever justify what a 40-year-old man chose to do. Judge William McGinty addressed the courtroom as well. He described the case as one of the most disturbing he had presided over, noting that Washington had continued living in the apartment for months while Audreona's remains were still there. Washington was sentenced to 38 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving the minimum term. In imposing the sentence, the judge cited Washington's prior conviction and his status as a repeat violent offender. Benny Washington is currently serving his sentence at the Lorain Correctional Institution in Ohio. Marquetta Wallace's case, which was filed separately on the gross abuse of a corpse charge, proceeded through the Cuyahoga County court system independently of Washington's trial. Beyond the sentencing, no additional public court filings or case updates were available at the time this documentary was researched. What the public record does establish is that Washington was convicted and sentenced after investigators spent months building the case against him. For Audreona's family, the sentence brought the criminal case to a close. It did not erase the months they spent searching for answers, or the time Benny Washington remained by their side while knowing the outcome they were desperately trying to uncover.
20 feet. That's where this documentary began. Now you know what stood on the other side of that distance. A balcony, a door Akua Avignon knocked on more than once, and a man who answered each time, giving her just enough to keep the search focused somewhere else. Audreona Barnes should have had the opportunity to build the future she had been working toward. Instead, her case became a reminder of how long the truth can remain hidden when the person responsible
is determined to keep it that way. Benny Washington is serving his sentence. Audreona's family received the measure of justice the court could provide. What they never recovered were the months spent searching for answers, while the truth remained only a short distance away. If you value carefully researched true crime documentaries built on verified evidence, consider subscribing. Every case on this channel is based on official records, court proceedings, and documented facts, told as accurately as the evidence allows.